Being king was a very tiring job. Geoffrey had missed many hours of sleep trying to do the tasks of a single day. If his father had a similar experience, he understood why he had become so grumpy after becoming king. And this is the life I am doomed to. A cursed existence. Never catching sleep. Only judging criminals, signing documents, and listening to the complaints of this and that lord. His sister was even helping him with much of the work, and the fact that she was not tired infuriated him. These cursed, damnable laws. Georgine was born first. Why is she not the heir? This was not the first time he had that thought. If I had the fortune of being born a woman, Gerald would have to deal with this instead of me. Gerald had loads of energy. He was smart, and everyone liked him. Many people liked Geoffrey too, but he was dumb. He had begun reading later than any of his siblings, and they had memorized sums, where he struggled significantly. Even figuring out how to hold a fork was a struggle for him in childhood. He learned eventually, and was certainly passable, but he was the worst sibling, the least qualified to be king. He sat with his face in his hands, rubbing at his eyes. He had been sitting at that wooden desk, reading by dim, flickering candlelight for hours, and it had strained him. While he was judging thieves, ruffians, marauders, and vandals, he had begun to say, "To the dungeon with him," skipping over any sentence lengths. There may have not even been good evidence of their crime, but there had been so much to do afterwards, his stomach turned at the thought of it. The piles of papers, the lords begging for funds he couldn't afford to give, and his sister's sly smirk she had perpetually glued on her face. What does she have to be happy about? He thought. In truth, what didn't she have to be happy for? She was beautiful, with an angular face, long and wavy chestnut hair, a milky complexion, and tall, with long legs. She was smart, not only when it came to reading and sums, but also in problem-solving and puzzles. She was clever, with a quick wit that devastated many people who had incurred her wrath. Though she never bragged or made much of herself, the sheer confidence she displayed on her face said more than any amount of words could. The two deadliest weapons in the Middle Kingdom were Sir Jacob's sword, Eventide, and Georgine's smirk. The way the very corners of her lips, where the pink had ended, tilted slightly upwards was menacing and beautiful. And then there was the matter of the shortage of coin. War in the East? What can we do about that? There really was nothing to do. What was he to do? Send the standing army into the Seven Holds to fight a war that had nothing to do with them? That would be foolish. Perhaps a conclave could be arranged, to settle things diplomatically? The idea sounded good, but who could say that neither sides would bring an army and bring the war into Linwood? Of course, it didn't need to happen in Linwood, but what other place would be neutral? His father would be back in a couple of days, though, so he could handle those matters when he returned. William the Wizard entered the dim room, lit only by orange candlelight. "I came to check on you, Your Highness. Would you care to join us in the dining hall for supper? I have instructed the cooks to prepare food for your supper that is healthy for the mind and body, if you would like to join us for supper." Yes. The cooks prepared food for the mind and body for supper, if you would like to join us for supper. Food was food as far as Geoffrey was concerned, but the wizard probably knew what he was talking about. Wizards were those who had ascended to higher learning at the College of Adavi. They were many things to many people: scholars, advisors, treasurers, chamberlains, healers, tutors, castellans, chaplains, physicians, and scribes. There were also rumors that they knew magic, but if William did, he had never bothered to show Geoffrey. He remembered being tutored by William, and remembered him always looking the same, with that ruddy, shaggy beard and that blue robe. Perhaps he had used magic to keep himself from aging, or perhaps Geoffrey just saw him every day and never noticed a change. He was quite handsome, but many wizards never married. It was said in joking that they were married to their books. In truth, Such high learning makes a mind so lofty that it cannot see the ground, so many wizards had very poor social skills. Geoffrey thought that it may have been that William was just a tad queer, until he met 20 more wizards at a conclave that were exactly the same. Never making eye contact, murmuring, head hanging, repetitive speech, and haphazardly changing the subject in the middle of conversation was normal for them, which made them very difficult to communicate with. "Yes, I think I would rather like that. Thank you, Wizard William," he said, with a quill hanging from his hand. "Yes, Supper for the mind and body will be waiting in the dining hall for supper for you, Your Highness." "I will be waiting for you in the dining hall." The dining hall was a long room with ornate marble columns lining the walls, and a long table with burning candles to illuminate it. The fireplace burning beside the head of the table gave off light to the rest of the room. Georgine was at the table, in a long-sleeved gown, the color of the evening sky with gold trim. Between her and William, you would have thought there was a minstrel telling jokes from the smiles they kept perpetually on their faces. Though they had always kept those smiles, Geoffrey couldn't help but feel as though he were left out of some secret that only the two of them knew. They began supper with a paste of fatty pear with garlic and onions, along with flat-fried cornbread. Next was salmon with rosemary and sage, with broccoli florets and greens. The greens made him smile, remembering how Gerald had always refused to eat them. Geoffrey himself always loved vegetables of all sorts. He wondered how his brother was doing in his travels. Gerald had refused to take a party with him, or even so much as a page, because he said he wanted to be inconspicuous. Gerald was easily the most conspicuous of the three of them. Geoffrey missed his brother in that moment, because he had always acted as a bridge of sorts between him and their sister. He was what brought the two of them together, but he was in the north, in a sweltering desert doing business for the realm. She was sitting there, smiling as she raised her fork to her mouth so elegantly. Even the way she chewed her food was graceful. "So, Geoffrey," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, "how is the investigation coming along? I've heard from Lord Commander Fari that war in the East is a common complaint. Have you put any thought into that?" Have you put any thought into that? The way she could wield a sentence to sound so innocent, yet cut so deeply. "Yes, in fact. I've been throwing ideas back and forth in my head all day about it. It is my duty, after all." His tone was harsh intentionally. Sleep had abandoned him, and his gentle nature had been fractured by exhaustion. He was not willing to let his sister beguile him that night. Georgine furrowed her perfect eyebrows and frowned. "Very good, then. I'm glad to hear it." She then began breaking into her salmon with her fork, and the smirk returned. "I'm glad to hear it." As though it were a surprise that Geoffrey was putting effort into being king. That thought sent a spike of rage into his heart, but he swallowed it with a large gulp of dark wine. He grabbed the bottle and poured himself some more. She sat with that smirk. "Wizard William, how have the chambers been? They appear to be in good condition." Geoffrey sat with his cup, sipping away. He poured himself another glass. "The chambers are wonderful, Yes, the chambers are well. Yes, The look on Georgine's face implied that she had wanted to hear more about the chambers. "Yes, indeed. Brother, back when our grandfather Joel was king, he appointed judges to deal with judging rabble. Father likes judging them himself, for whatever reason, perhaps to make sure it's done right. But it may be wise to bring such a system back." To make sure it's done right. That was a harsh blow. He knew that he was inept when it came to judging, but hearing someone say it stung worse than a hornet. The fact that it was his sister made it worse. He said nothing, pouring himself another glass. "Yes, yes. Murmured William the Wizard. "Yes. Delegation is the key to leadership. Yes. Knowing how to spread out responsibilities is key. Yes." Geoffrey sat, staring at his sister. What is she smiling at? Is she planning? He took another sip and poured himself another glass. He had far too many glasses of wine by then. Did something funny happen? He asked, brusquely. Why are you smiling? Did I miss a joke? Did I miss something funny happen? Why are you always smiling? Why am I smiling? I'm not smiling, she said, smiling. Yes, you are. Stop playing stupid games with me. I'm not stupid. Or maybe I am. I'm the weakest and stupidest brother. But I inherit the crown. Isn't that great? Because I had the misfortune of being born, I have to inherit this mess. I wish you were born with a cock. Then none of this will be happening to me. Georgine's face showed her shock. You've had too much wine, brother. It's time to calm down, she said, the candlelight glimmering in her eyes and off of her fork. You've had too much wine. And isn't that something? You can't even say my name. Or you won't. Brother. You won't even say my name. You've always hated me. You're talking nonsense, brother. Brother. Geoffrey! Stop. You need sleep. Finish your food and go to bed. Geoffrey quickly rose from his chair, sending it tumbling back. You're always telling me what to do. Always grinning at me because you know you're smarter than me. And better looking. And more qualified to rule. You want to rule through me vicariously. You've been telling me what to do this entire time. I have given you advice when you've asked for it, she said, raising her voice. I have made you do nothing. William fiddled with his books, trying to grab them, constantly dropping them, trying to escape. Yes, you have. You're always manipulating me, making me think I'm doing something wrong until I do what you want. You cruel, cruel woman. That smirk on your face, when father is condemning someone to death. You know I hate it, and you smirk at me. He grabbed another chair and sat, almost falling over. Why do you do this to me? Why? I know I can't do anything right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm a failure. He began sobbing into his hands. Geoffrey, she said. Come. Let's get you to sleep. You've worked hard, and you've done a lot today. You deserve it. When Geoffrey raised his head, he noticed a line glistening down his sister's face. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. I'm your host, TGD. This week we see that Geoffrey is really being hammered by his kingly duties, that they're really taking a toll on his psyche, and he's kind of losing it. He ends up blowing up at his sister. So let's, as usual, we'll start with the writing aspect, and I have a bit to say about this week. So at the very beginning, it says, being king was a very tiring job. Now, writing critics and tip givers will say to never use the word very, but just use a stronger word to begin with. So they would say, instead of saying being king was very tiring, what they would want is being king was exhausting. But Geoffrey isn't exhausted, he's very tired, and those two are different. So I showed this chapter to a friend, and she hated the line, wizards were those who had ascended to higher learning at the College of Adavi, because it was just exposition. I guess it was showing and not telling. To tell the truth, with the amount of stuff in this book that I dropped hints for and let the reader figure out on their own and told instead of showed, a simple piece of exposition, spoon-feeding someone that Adavi is where the Wizards College is, really doesn't seem like a big offense to me. It's a plain factoid. Okay, so it's not high poetry. I'm sorry. I don't think that... I personally don't have any problem with it. There's plenty of stuff through this book that I've read and cringed, And just in general, some of my stuff, even my newer stuff, I'll read and I'll be like, ooh, that wasn't good. But this line, wizards were those who had ascended to higher learning at the College of Adavi, is not one of those lines. Now, that same person had an issue with the line, the candlelight glimmering in her eyes and off of her fork. And honestly, pointing out that the glimmering fork is kind of weird, so I agree with that one. So simply saying the candlelight glimmered in her eyes was enough. Off the fork was kind of weird. And while we're talking about criticism, I'm going to go off on a tangent for a little bit about criticism. So I'm not someone who shuns criticism, or I don't have like super thin skin and get offended whenever someone doesn't like my stuff. I'm used to people not liking my stuff. That's fine. But I want to talk about criticism more in a general sense, like the meta in the criticism scene. So there's an entire genre on YouTube of criticizing movies and TV, which I'm fine with that. I watch those videos. I'll listen to someone complain about Wonder Woman 87 or Terminator Dark Fate or whatever, because I hate Hollywood too. And even if movie theaters were open in 2020, I wouldn't have gone to the movies once because I don't think any of it's any good. So I'm fine with criticizing it, the stuff that's bad. But some of these guys, their criticism gets so deep and so nitpicky that it's irritating. So there's two ends of the spectrum on this. So on the one end, there are people who simply say, well, this is bad, this is objectively bad, and they just talk about it for 9 hours, just not really saying anything. So congratulations. It's from people whose entire career is based on criticism. So these people have never produced anything themselves. Their only skill is criticizing. These people never put anything out themselves. They can just say, well, this was bad, and they couldn't do it themselves. But on the other end, there's people who do like these fan-fiction-y things, like how Walking Dead season 6 finale should have ended. And they talk as though they could do better. But they can't, because they never have. These people also don't produce things. I remember back in the 2010s, I was like into professional wrestling and stuff, and there was this guy named Adam from What Culture who would make these videos like how WWE should have booked Survivor Series 2006 or something. And what was annoying about, I think he still makes those too, but what's annoying is that he gets an ideal world where everything works for him the way he wants. So wrestlers don't get injured, the crowd reacts the way he wants, and he has all of these established tools. He has all of the wrestling talent, all the superstars, all the sets, the cameras, the editing, the packaging. He has all of this in the WWE in his imagination. He can utilize all that in his imagination. And it's funny that I say that, these people can't produce anything themselves. Adam actually tried doing it himself. This guy who's so intelligent and so smart and, if I was the booker, I would have done this. He made a wrestling promotion. What Culture Wrestling. And it failed. So for all this criticism of, this is what they should have done with the tools they had, when he tries to do it, he fails. Now, there's exceptions. I'm not nagging on the criticism genre as a whole, because it is stuff that I listen to frequently and enjoy. So a guy I enjoy is Shadiversity, who frequently criticizes elements of fantasy, tropes, misconceptions. But Shad is actually a writer. Shad is a writer himself. If you were to go to him and say, you think you can do better? Okay, do it better then. He can go. I have done it. He's a writer himself. He has his own fantasy series where he does things the way he thinks they should be done. So he's not just an armchair coach. He's actually out there doing it. He's in writing and doing it himself. Another guy is a guy named Zarek Zakarin, or Zakaron. He has a good series of videos called What If Blank Was Good, where he'll talk about the Elder Scrolls, like what if Skyrim was good. And he makes an idealized version of the game, including like mechanics, storyline, things like that. And he prefaces it by saying it's an overly idealized fan fiction. He's not like these guys, oh, this is what they should have done. He says this is an idealized fan fiction. This is not something that's realistic. This is a fun what if. He's not saying they did a bad job with the tools they had. So I don't hate the criticism genre, and I'm not saying that you're not allowed to make fan fiction. It's just the way you do it. So don't act like a douchebag and say, well, they should have done this when you've never done anything yourself. And that's tough, because there's people that I get criticism from myself, and I know that they've never done anything. Like, well, you should do this. And I know for a fact that if they tried, they couldn't. Because they have tried, and they couldn't. So, it's tough. Again, I'm not someone who, like, neglects or like, shuns criticism. But I would rather be criticized by people that I respect. Okay, rant over. I'm done ranting about that. Let's talk about the characters here. So Geoffrey, in this chapter, we immediately see that being king is not all it's cracked up to be. I don't think that's something we see a lot in fiction, or not that I see anyway. Like, imagine if Scar in The Lion King, he became king and then he was like, wow, this is actually hard. I'm going back to the Badlands where I was the de facto king anyway. Although I do guess we do see that from people like, I can't be king. I don't want to be king. I guess we do see that. We actually see that he wishes that he was born a woman so that he wouldn't have to be king. He considers this a terrible fate. He's doomed to be king. And the self-doubt in himself is welling up again. The job of being the king is taking a toll on him. And seeing himself doing these things poorly is reinforcing these negative thoughts about himself. He's like, well, I actually can't do it. Like, I was right. I was right the entire time. And that's where he ends off in this chapter, back down in a mire of self-doubt. So let's talk about Georgine. We only see Georgine from Geoffrey's perspective so far. And we've heard the king talk about her, but we've only seen her from Geoffrey's perspective. So from Geoffrey's perspective, she's perfect. She's beautiful, she's intelligent and confident. She's everything he isn't. She's everything he wished he was. So everything she says sounds like a backhanded remark. From his perspective, she's so much smarter than he is that everything she says is simply to point out how dumb he is. Now, Georgine gets her own chapter eventually, but we do get a little bit of foreshadowing in this chapter that maybe Geoffrey's perspective isn't entirely correct. Because at the end of the chapter, she's crying. Now, I also want to point out that she's described as having chestnut hair and a milky complexion. Now, they say to never describe someone's skin tone with food, but I don't care. I don't care what you think. I'll write whatever I want. Everyone is chocolate. If you're dark chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, everyone is chocolate. They had chocolate skin. That's how I'm going to describe every single person in my next book. They had white chocolate skin. They had 20% cacao skin. That's what the next book's going to be. Yeah. So that was probably intentional that I put that there just to irritate people that would say, don't describe people's skin tone with food by describing her as milky. Now, William, we get to see more of him than we have up to this point. So I failed to mention that William the Wizard is loosely based on another friend of mine, but it's so loosely based that it's barely worth mentioning. I do have a friend named William, but this character is nothing like him at all. There's no correlation. It's just the name. It's just the name. We see from William that he's actually a pretty caring guy. Like, he comes to Geoffrey's office himself. Even though he's like the court wizard, he's like an extremely important guy. He comes to Geoffrey himself. He doesn't send a servant. He comes himself, and he wants to make sure that he's going to come to dinner and eat because he cares about his well-being. I think I intended William the Wizard and wizards in general to, for the most part, be savants, which is kind of hinted at. Geoffrey mentions that wizards have poor social skills. He says, although all the wizards at the conclave never made eye contact, were murmuring, head hanging, repetitive speech, and haphazardly changing the subject in the middle of conversation. So basically all wizards have autism, is basically the idea here. So wizards are like speedrunners. They have zero social intelligence and very high conventional intelligence. When he's thinking about wizards, wizards are just maesters. Wizards are many things to many people. They're scholars, advisors, treasurers, chamberlains, healers, tutors, castellans, chaplains, physicians, and scribes. It's a maester. It's a maester from Game of Thrones. That's literally all it is. Now, we do get a bit of a hint of how Geoffrey views Gerald, so let's keep this in mind going forward into Gerald's further chapters. Remember this note, that Geoffrey considers Gerald to be the glue that holds the family together. Like, it's his radiance that everyone is able to orbit around, basically. Like, he's the sun that they all orbit around because he's such a gravitational figure, for, to use an analogy. Keep that in mind. If you're going to be following this story, keep that in mind, that this is how Geoffrey views Gerald. Now, I don't have many notes or fun facts about this, like miscellaneous fun facts. The only thing I can point out is that for dinner they have a paste of fatty pear with garlic and onions, along with flat fried cornbread, guac and chips. They had guacamole and corn chips. Guacamole and tortilla chips. That's what they had for dinner. They have fatty pear and with garlic and onions. It's guacamole. They had guacamole, but I'm so clever. I just described, like, that's what they do too. They simply lengthen the name of it. It's like prosciutto with watercress and aioli with heirloom tomatoes. Okay, that's a BLT. You made a BLT, and you called it a prosciutto, heirloom tomato, and watercress sandwich with aioli. You made a BLT. So that's basically what I did there. Just extended the common name for it to make it sound more fancy. And that's it for this week. Next week, let me look real quick. Next week we go back to the 7 holds, back to Joshua, and see what's going on in his mind. So that'll be fun. We'll start to see more of Josh's subtle face turn, because we've sort of seen Brandon's subtle heel turn. We've been seeing glimpses of cruelty from Brandon. So let's see if we see some good things out of Josh so far. Because it's all about, this book is all about perspective and how you view other people. Like, this book plays heavily into the perspective of each individual character, which is something that I liked about Game of Thrones specifically, so I wanted to emulate that with this work, along with emulating a lot of other things about Game of Thrones. But we already know that if you're following this series at all. So that's been the Storytime Saturday podcast. Make sure you like if you're watching on YouTube, like wherever you may be listening to this. Make sure you subscribe to the Underscore Chalice channel. Check out some of the other videos we have. We have gaming videos that are always fun. We've got miscellaneous videos, things like knife videos and philosophy and things like that. So we appreciate having you here. Thank you for being here on the Storytime Saturday podcast. And I'll see you next week.